Right, hello again. This is the second video in this series of GCSE revision videos. Today what we're going to be looking at is the family. It's the first video on the family, and we're going to start off really by looking at different types of families that you might well come across in society. So let's have a quick look. Hopefully I've gone up into, not that corner up there now, which is awesome. So this is what we're going to be doing today, family diversity and family forms. We're going to have a look at some of the key terms and definitions that you're going to come across in the family module of Sociology GCSE. We'll start looking at different family types and family diversity, start to give you a bit of an introduction to some of the changes that have happened in the sociology of families over the last 50, 60, 70 years. And we're going to finish off by just looking at what we might consider to be ethnic minority family forms and global family trends as well. So let's get into the nitty gritty of this. So first of all, key terms and definitions. Well, family is kind of an important one, isn't it? I mean, this is quite a difficult definition to start off with, really. But when we look at what a family is, if you were to look it up in a dictionary, it might say something like a group of people traditionally related by, a group of people related by ties of blood or marriage. And that is very much the traditional definition of a family, seeing it as like what we call a conventional or normal nuclear family in mind. But the problem with that is that it ignores family diversity. So for instance, if you are in a family whereby you have a step parent, or even if like one of your parents lives with another adult but they aren't married to them, you're not related to that person by ties of blood or marriage. And also, what happens if you are someone who has been born through a surrogate parent, which is quite common, particularly for same-sex couples? You're not related by blood nor marriage to that person. So the definition kind of falls down a little bit. So first we need to know is the definition, the dictionary definition we have of family is a little bit problematic because it doesn't consider all different types of families. But because what we have in sociology is what we call family diversity, and this just means having a variety of different types of families in society, not just a nuclear family. And Britain is a really good example of a society with varieties of different family types. So we'll start having a look at these family types in a minute, but before we go any further, it's quite important to know some of the key terms around what can, some of the processes that can lead to different family types. So marriage is one of the things we'll need to know about, and that's the key word, legally recognised union of two partners in a relationship. It's a legal contract. Monogamy is the way in which, well, the system we practice in Britain and most of the rest of the world by thinking about just being married to one person at one time. If you're married to more than one person, it's a crime. And technically that is what we call polygamy, when you're married to more than one person at once, but it's a crime in the UK called bigamy, lots of amies there. And then also the final thing we'll look at is called cohabitation. So cohabitation is just where two partners live together, but without being married. So let's have a look at some of these family types and just briefly explain what they are and how we define them. So the nuclear family is essentially, as we mentioned already, like the traditional conventional family we might consider. It is made up of two parents, biologically have children, and we're talking about at least two children there. So it's got to be more than one. Normally to think about two kids, but it can be 3, 4, 5, 6, however many, but it's more than one. So at least two kids in a nuclear family. Lone parent family is fairly self-explanatory because it only has one parent in it. Now that might be as the result of a divorce. It might be the result of the fact that one of the parents has never been around in the first place since the children have been born. But we look at that as having any number of children, but just with one parent. And incidentally, it might be interesting to know that the vast majority of lone parent families in Britain are what we call matriarchal. They're headed by a woman. A beanpole family is where we have two adults, so a mum and a dad, and one child, just one child in a beanpole family. So it can't be a nuclear family because we need at least one child for that. So a beanpole family is just where you have one child, and often the family tree structure tends to be very long and thin. You've got two parents having one kid, that kid might then meet someone else and they might have one kid, they might meet someone else, have one kid, and it's a very long, thin family structure, hence the term beanpole family. It's like a beanpole, someone that holds a bean up. And no, I've never seen what a beanpole looks like either, but it's the phrase that we have to use for the exams. Reconstituted family, one of the words that some people struggle to say, reconstituted, also known as a blended family or a step family. This is where you've got two adults who come together. They can have children, sometimes they don't, but tend to have children, come together after a marriage has ended and then they've had a divorce, and then they will sort of get together to make a new family. So on this picture here, the woman and her son may have come from a previous marriage. That marriage has ended and been perhaps had a divorce. Then we've got the man and his daughter. They would have been in the same situation. They've now come together to reconstitute a new type of family, or what we call the blended family. And then we've got an extended family. So this includes any type of family that includes other relatives that aren't like kind of your next generation. So it might be your grandparents living with you. It might be your aunties and uncles. And we can talk about extended families as either being horizontally extended, which goes across, or vertically. Vertically is easier because basically we're talking about different generations. So great-grandparents, grandparents, parents, kids. If it goes horizontally extended, we're thinking there about your parents, brothers and sisters and stuff like that. So it might be aunties, uncles, maybe cousins and stuff like that involved in a family. And then the final one, pretty self-explanatory, it's same-sex families. So any family, doesn't matter how many children, but it's of partners, adult partners that are of the same sex. So two men or two women, for instance. So 6 types of families there that hopefully will give you a bit of a background as to types of families we can talk about when we're talking about things like changes in family structures. Now, what we mean by this is there's been some huge changes over the last 50, 60, 70 years. And these are the things that your sociology exam is going to ask you about. One of the key things with sociology at GCSE, particularly when it comes to the family and A-level, to be honest, is just knowing a little bit of history about how things have changed over the last, as I say, 50, 60, 70 years. Now, we're going to look at some of these key aspects here. So marriage, I told you already, was the legally recognized union of 2 partners in a relationship. One of the things we can say about marriage since, say, 1950 at least, or let's go for 1970, because I've said in the last 50 years, marriage rates have generally declined, going down over the last sort of 50, 60, 70 years. But what has happened is not just been a complete downward trend. We've seen things like remarriage. So people, when they get divorced after their first marriage, will get married again, potentially leading to a reconstituted family. And the other thing we talk about now is serial monogamy. So what we mean by this is where people get married, then get divorced, maybe marry again, maybe get divorced again, marry again, and get divorced again. Like a serial killer doesn't just kill one person, they kill many people. Someone in serial monogamy will have multiple relationships, but never those relationships will cross over. It'll always be one starts, then finishes, then another one starts, then finishes, often through marriage. And the other thing we can talk about is the fact that same-sex marriage was legalized in 2013. So this was only, at time of recording, 7 years ago, actually 6 years ago, when the first same-sex marriage happened in 2014. So these have been big changes, you know, some of these more recent than others. When it comes to divorce, excuse me, I need my tea because it's really important. Nice mug as well. Hey, you can get one of these. Just drop me an email, hello@allsociology.co.uk, or drop me a line on Instagram. Divorce. Divorce is basically the legal recognition of a partnership or a marriage breaking up. It's the legal dissolution of a marriage is what we might refer to it as. And divorce rates have increased. So whilst marriage has gone down, divorce has gone up over the last 50 years. And one of the main reasons for this, I'm going to talk about this a lot more in a future video, is what we call the Divorce Reform Act of 1969. So this is a piece of legal policy that enabled people to get divorced far more easily. But the thing we want to say as well about this, like the marriage rates going down, it's not just been a complete downward trend. There are some almost like green shoots of hope going through. So one of the things we can talk about particularly is that the rates of divorce were at their lowest 2 years ago in 2018 that they had been since 1971. Now there's a whole load of reasons for that, and I'm going to talk about that in a future video, but it's quite interesting that if you can say that, okay, divorce rates have declined, divorce rates have increased rather than inclined over the last 50 years, but it's not just going down, it's not going up. There has been a leveling out in the last few years, and we're at the lowest rate now for almost 50 years. And thinking about other changes in families that have led to different types of families as well, this is a key one. So women now, on average, have about just under 2 kids. Of course, we can't have half a child, but on average, women have just under 2 kids each over the course of what they call childbearing years. Whereas if you go back to the 1960s, it was very nearly 3 children. So on average, 2.95 children per woman in the 1960s versus less than 2 today. So it shows basically that women are having one fewer child on average than they were 50, 60 years ago. One of the other things, not surprising given that marriage has declined, is that people are cohabiting a lot more. So living together without being married. And in fact, that's the fastest growing type of family in the UK at the moment, which is a cohabiting family. And the other thing that's also grown massively is lone parent families. We're seeing a far greater sort of proliferation of those in society, as well as far more people living on their own as well, either through choice or through necessity. And I'll talk about that a bit more in a future session as well. Now, when it comes to thinking about family diversity, another sip of tea, one of the things that the exam spec, in this case EDUCAS, want you to be able to do is to talk a little bit about common or archetypal family types in different ethnic minorities. So what I'm going to do, just to help you out with this a little bit, is just make a comparison here between Asian households, and by that what I mean is fundamentally Indian, Pakistani and Bangladeshi, and black households as well, so black Caribbean and black African. When we look at some of the differences between them, if we look at Asian families, they tend to have a high rate of extended families within that group of people. So about 1 in 5, at least 1 in 5 Asian families live in what we consider to be an extended family, whereas if you look at black households, this only tends to be about 8%, so less than 1 in 10. By contrast, if we look at the rate of lone parent families in these different communities, very low in those Asian households. So less than about 1 in 20 families will be a lone parent families. In black households, we're looking at about 1 in 5. So much more common if you're in an Asian family to live in an extended family, much more common if you're in a black household to live in a lone parent family. And just that you might be interested to know, rates of marriage tend to be much higher amongst Asian households than they do amongst black households. So that's a little bit of like ethnic minority difference in family types and what we might call archetypal families, like the common family type, if you will. Now, if we look a little bit further afield, because the exam would also want you to know a little bit about how families differ around the world, there's a few things we can talk about. And the first one is the way in which different cultures might practice marriage. So we can talk here about polygamy. And as I mentioned earlier, polygamy is basically being married to more than one person at one time. And you might see this in a variety of smaller communities around the world. So, for instance, we look at polygyny, which is men with more than one wife or partner. That's quite common in certain aspects of Mormon culture in the States, and also in certain fundamentalist Islamic cultures as well. And then also we've got polyandry, which is women having more than one husband or one male partner. This is less common, but a good example of a community this occurs in is a tribe called the Nayar tribe, which was around in India in the late 19th century, where women had up to 12 male partners. The other thing the exam wants you to know about is arranged marriage. Now, this is different to forced marriage. Arranged marriage is often where a couple are chosen to be together by their parents, and it's kind of been pre-arranged. It's been discussed between those families. Often, we're thinking about places like, again, South Asia, so India, maybe Pakistan, those kind of places where people are chosen to be with each other, often to do with the social status of their families and to keep that status alive. So in India, you might be aware of something called the caste system, which means that you can't really kind of have relationships with people outside of your caste. So this might be a reason for that. And it's something that we don't experience as much in the UK, but it definitely does happen. Arranged marriage is a thing, but it's much less common in the UK. And then the final thing, you've probably heard about this before, is in China, about 40 years ago, they had what's called a one-child policy. Now, due to overpopulation in China, it's the biggest country in the world, it's got over 1 billion people. What they tried to do was to limit the amount of growth that population was having, because they were worried that they weren't going to be able to kind of like help support all of those people that were in their country. So they basically told people that you can only have one kid. Now, what was interesting about this is that most people stuck to this rule. But in fact, if you had a bit of money, so if you were a higher social class or had a higher social status, you could actually just pay a fine and have as many kids as you wanted. So there's a bit of an example there of class playing a role in how you can deal with these, what we might talk about as state interventions in family life. It's the government telling you essentially what you can, what you can't do in your bedroom, which is an interesting thing there. So there we go. Second video is basically done. Let me just recap a little bit about what I've talked to you about today. And by the way, I've got my hands on a chair here. I have actually got some arms. I just sort of like relaxing. I just noticed that looks really, really weird. So what have we gone through today? We've gone through some key terms and definitions about some of the different family types and marriage, divorce, cohabitation, those kind of things. We've looked at some of the key changes in families, and I've told you about the decline in marriage rates over time, but there is a bit of a bump with things like same-sex marriage, and also a big increase in divorce rates, but that we've seen has actually remained stable for the last few years. Actually, we're hitting the lowest rate in the last 50 years in 2018. I talked to you a little bit about some variations in ethnic minority families between Asian families and Black families. And then we finally finished off there by considering some of the global family trends by looking at things like polygamy, the one-child policy, and other things around the world that might be slightly different to how things work with the family in the UK. So that's it. That's the that's the second video done. So I hope you've enjoyed this. Once again, if you have enjoyed this, if you've learned something, do me a massive favor, stick a like on it on YouTube, go and subscribe to us. Go and visit me on my Instagram page, which is instagram.com/allsociology, and give us a like or give us a follow or something like that. Also, something else you can do, tell your mates about it. If you know someone else does GCSE Sociology and they don't know about this video and it helped you, tell them, because it might well help them too. All right, I'm out of here again, and I will see you again next time when we do another video on the family. Take care for now. Bye.